So this is my third take of Sprint 5, so I'm going to try to run through this as quickly as possible since the last video was 11 minutes. So from last week you wanted to see the header files of the singletons, so here it is for my bullet factory. I don't allow copy constructor or assignment instructor. I only allow one instance of the bullet factory instance at any time, and all my singletons are set up in this exact same way with the same layout. They all have a stack of objects that it collects and then appropriately deletes them upon the destructor being called. So when scene terminate is called at the end of a scene, it also calls terminate on the factories that need to be called. What that does is just goes through the stack of items, deletes them, pops them, and then at the end I have a test to see if it is indeed empty at the end. Then it'll say empty stack, so I'll just hit play. Once I close this, I'll see it says deleted recycled items 30, which is 30 mushrooms, and then emptied mushroom stack, so it was successfully cleaned up. From last week, I also didn't do the spider movement correctly. It was random, and there were a bunch of if statements based on the randomness for the movement, so now all I have is a movement 1 type, and if there are 3 movements to the spider, I'll have movement 2 and 3 to go along with this, but for now I just have movement 1. And then it adds vector offsets to a queue. And then in the constructor, this is only called based on how often I want that movement to occur. So I found the right number to be 6, which is how much it takes, how many of these it takes for the spider to move across the screen completely, and then that's the only thing that's created. They're not created every frame like they used to be. Only one instance of that queue is created, and then in the update is where I just tell it to go through those orders and then pop them, and then it should be good. So we'll see this here. So while not perfect, it's still more accurate than the randomness I had last time. The zigzagging is more accurate, and so is the up and down movement. So once I added in the 2 other movement options and figure out the right offsets from the actual game, it should be okay. The centipede head the centipede is the biggest change I have. So with the centipede head, I have segments as a parameter that it passes along, and so you can see here in my first scene, I have it set to 12. I can set this to any number I want. If I want 6 segments, I'll just hit 6. And there's 6 segments. So if I go to my centipede head, I try to optimize the check as much as I could. Of course, it's still only checking every 8 frames, but it was still a bit of a mess. So now I got rid of some if statements checking to see whether or not it should rotate. Now it'll just always rotate, but based on a rotation multiplier. So if it shouldn't rotate, this will be 0, which will cancel out the angle. It'll be 1 or -1 based on if it's turning left or right. So that's less costly than what I had before. This could still be optimized in terms of the logic, but the logic's pretty much the same from last week. I was able to get rid of some if statements, but I don't know if it's enough to make it completely efficient. And upon construction, it calls create segments based on the number of segments it has. It passes it on, and then it creates them almost recursively, where it just keeps calling the same function within the segment, subtracting 1 segment each time to just create as many as it needs, as long as it's not 0. And then what the segments do is just get the array position of the old positions of the head or the previous segment. So I'll demonstrate what I mean here. That doesn't make much sense. So when it's done with this movement, it'll assign each of those movements to the old array, which is where the information is going to be stored for the next segments. So the next segment looks at the previous segment's old array, which is through return array position. We can see here return array position just returns a position in that old array. And then each segment and head is built this exact same way, so thankfully I don't have to change too much with the logic. It all just kind of flowed together and worked well because they have essentially the same code structure. So they just follow each other's movements, and it seems to work pretty well if I just hit play. And so I do have some splitting. If you see here, I'll hit the middle. It does split, but not perfectly, and of course there's still a gap between the head and the bodies. But it's, and this happens whenever I technically hit a poison mushroom. I also try to get the poison movement to work. I'll try to demonstrate that here. So if I go into my mushroom field and I just make every mushroom poisoned, I get some kind of behavior, but it's not perfect and it might break sometimes. So we'll see this here. So it does go straight down when it hits a poison mushroom, and then it returns its normal behavior once it hits the player zone. And then I can of course split it. It doesn't split perfectly. That's the best I could get without breaking my game even more. So I'll just close that out for now. And then I do have the score manager set up as a singleton. I'll just try to go through this quickly since I'm probably running out of time. So based on the player, parameter passes on. So player 1 score is affected if the player is player 1. Upon each critter death, it just calls the flea death, scorpion death, or spider death on the manager. It doesn't pass in, or it doesn't care how much it should give because the score manager is in charge of that. It just says, I died, so do something based on that information. Based on the distance between the blaster and the player, that's how I get what score it should give it, the score multiplier. So it's either 3, 6, 9 because the score is either 300, 600, or 900. So if I go to my score manager, we'll see here in spider death, it multiplies 100, which is the base score, times the distance, which should be 369. And then we'll see that here if I run this. Oh. So that was a close shot, so my score was 900. If I was farther, it would be 600, and then even farther would be 300. So I'll demonstrate the same thing with the flea, just to see that the score does in fact change. So there the flea died too, so it was 900 plus the 100 from the flea, so it's 1000, so the score's updating well. I just need to make a HUD next week, and thankfully I think I understand how to do that, so I should be okay with the HUD and the score manager. But that's pretty much all I have for this week, so thank you.